What's up, all you viewers? I hope you grabbed some snack because you're in for 21 minutes of exciting Fire Emblem. This is Don1 and Mekkah.
Hi.
And we are joined today by a very special guest. His name is Lord Raven. He's one of my longtime friends from Seren's Forest.
Hi.
And we are together all bringing to you Chapter 5, my Fire Emblem 5 Paragon Mode 0% Girls playthrough. So Leaf and company are still bumbling around through the Manster Castle, and they've managed to happen across this very long, kind of winding path that's surrounding a gladiatorial arena. And we also see here that Asvel has somehow found herself in the middle of that arena, facing off against some very tough enemies. She's accompanied with a new character. Her name is Nana. She's Asvel's adopted daughter, and also Finn's biological daughter. And basically what ended up happening was, at the beginning of the game, Raedric, one of the main antagonists of this game, captured Nana and Merida, another one of Asvel's adopted daughters, and in order for Asvel to reclaim them, he is basically kind of playing with his food. He's telling Asvel, if you can deal with all these arena enemies, then I'll give them back to you.
His arena enemies are quite tough. Asvel can kind of handle them, but Nana cannot, so she needs to stay out of range. And in the meantime, all of our units are on their way to rescue them. But they're being slowed down by the first group of enemies. The enemy density in this chapter overall is pretty low, but when they are there, they are in large groups, so it's really annoying to deal with our very limited squad.
Yeah, and some of the enemies in this chapter are actually a gigantic pain in the ass, because first of all, we have a couple of mages, and they only have 10 or 11 attack, but at the same time, no one has any magic except for Asvel, who himself only has 4 magic. So in order to deal with some of those mages better, we end up having to put Leafus and Lyra out as bait, and that basically halves the magic and all of their other stats. We also do that with Armor Knights so they can have their defense, because the Armor Knights would be a pain in the ass to deal with no growths either, and we end up offing many of the Armor Knights with a bunch of rapier crits and hits. And right here, we're about to kill this mage who is currently housing Lara. And this kind of reminds you of FE6, where when you rescue a unit and suicide with that unit, and that unit gets another move. That's kind of what we did with Lara there, so she can go up to this priest and steal the pure water.
That's a good point that you bring up, Raven, because getting a unit captured and then freeing them immediately afterwards is kind of like giving them an extra bonus 1 tile of movement. And we kind of employ that with both Leafus and Lara, because you can sort of see that they're way ahead the rest of our group now. They're going to be the ones who are charged with opening the door to the arena, which will trigger a special cutscene.
Yeah, so what we're doing here is Asvel is basically invincible for this chapter. She can get captured if she's at very low HP, but the chance is very little, and other than that, she basically cannot die. But we actually wanted her not to kill an enemy on the first turn for some very complicated reasons. I think Donna's probably more fit to explain that.
Yeah, so if we move a unit into the little corridor, the 2-tile wide corridor on the right, kind of like what we just did with Leafus, it's going to trigger a cutscene that is going to cause Merida to spawn. She's a female sword fighter that appeared out of one of the gates in the middle of the map. And the alternative condition to her spawning is if Asvel kills an enemy in the arena, then on the subsequent enemy phase, she will also spawn. Now, the reason why we didn't want that to happen earlier is because if Asvel kills an enemy in the arena, that causes more promoted enemies to spawn as well. So the way to put this is that if the game detects that there are fewer than 3 enemies alive in the arena, then it will start spawning extra promoted enemies, and we don't want that to happen, because if Asvel doesn't end up killing all the promoted enemies right on time, then they're not going to go away for the remainder of the map. And Asvel has enough trouble dealing with the 3 starting enemies already, but 2 of the reinforcements, a Swordmaster and a Berserker, are very dangerous, and no one on our team is remotely capable of dealing with them. So if Asvel doesn't kill the enemies with the proper timing, then that's a reset, and that tends to happen pretty often because Asvel's forced to use an inaccurate Iron Blade, but she can also kill enemies too quickly by either getting a critical hit or activating Adept.
We will open the door on the next turn, but you might have noticed in the previous player phase, Leaf rescued Asvel, which is kind of counterintuitive because Leaf doesn't have much movement and he's going to lose movement by rescuing Asvel. Well, you're about to see in this cutscene why this happens. This cutscene forces Leaf to move up using the power of Wrath Caliber, probably to push, wind and stuff behind them. in front of the door, and Leaf still has his movement as well, so he can just drop Asvel whenever he wants. And this is kind of a warp. It's a really cool tactic and also probably design oversight by intelligence systems. And this just lets us do whatever we need to do with Leaf. And it also lets us advance Asvel because he's our primary killer in this map.
I can kind of imagine Asvel just like farting Graph Caliber along to try to propel Leaf towards the door. But because Leaf loses half his movement when he's carrying Asvel, you can sort of imagine that like he kind of breaks the laws of the game for a little while. He somehow gains like 40 movement for just one cutscene. But that's in preparation for this upcoming enemy phase where we have to deal with this next group of enemies that consists of 4 soldiers and an armor knight. Now, we're used to soldiers being really bad enemies, especially if you play the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem games, where they have like sometimes some strength and a lot of HP, but basically no speed and skill. And in this game, that's also sort of the case, but the soldiers in this map are all level 12, which is 11 levels higher than the ones that we've seen in the previous 2 chapters. So these guys are actually kind of tough. It's very hard to one-round KO them with anybody, even with Asvel, with his pure water boost, using fire. Sometimes you can one-round KO them, and it'd be desirable on this enemy phase if they did in fact attack him. But whether or not they attack Asvel, Leaf, or Nana is somewhat random here. I've never seen their behavior be consistent. To sort of prevent Leaf from dying, we offered up both Lara and Lithis as capture bait. So the Armor Knight captured Lithis, which is good because the Armor Knight hits like a truck, and one of the other soldiers captured Lara. So on the subsequent player phase, when we actually have to kill them, 3 of the soldiers will be low on their HP, and then 2 of the enemies will have their stats cut in half and easier to kill.
So you might have seen something strange happen when Nana was attacked. We said she wasn't very durable, but then she ended up restoring like all of her HP on her counterattack. This is because she was using her personal sword, the Earth Sword, which restores HP when it hits something, kind of like the Resire Tome, or sometimes called Nosferatu. This sword is great, but it's pretty heavy, so Nana can often get doubled when she uses it against faster enemies, which is why she isn't as durable as this chapter might make her seem. But it's still a great asset, and so is Nana's class. She's a troubadour, which means she can use swords and staffs, so that alone is very helpful. And in addition, she has the charm skill, which grants plus 10 hit and avoid to everyone in her support range, so 1 to 3 tiles away from her. And that's a very nice boost to consistency in addition to the support bonuses that we already have and the leadership stars that we have.
Yeah, it's a shame this isn't a Groats playthrough because Nana is really dominant in Groats. She does basically everything that you'd want her to do. She can heal, she has a mount, she can kill just about everything, especially once she gets a Rat Scroll, then she becomes borderline invincible.
Speaking of wishing this were a Groats playthrough, normally in a Groats playthrough by this point, we would have given Leaf the life ring and the speed rings that we obtained in the first 2 chapters. And this in combination with some of the extra experience that he would have gained by this point would have boosted basically all of his offensive and defense parameters, and he'd be the best combat unit at this point in the game, more or less, because he'd also have 2 range due to his light sword. But because we don't have Groats, that investment in the Leaf was totally pointless, and we've instead sort of shifted that investment a little bit into Asvel, because we gave him the speed ring instead of Leaf. And the reason why we did this is because of the upcoming enemy phase. You can see that we're about to get swarmed by a mob of enemy mages who have fire and thunder tomes, and we also put Asvel in range of a group of enemy archers and 1 general sub-boss. This looks precarious, and in fact it is. It's probably one of the least reliable parts of this chapter, next to having Avel kill all of the arena enemies with the proper timing. Asvel takes around 70 to 80% of his HP and damage from the enemy archers, and he gets 1 hit KO'd by the enemy boss, so he has to dodge at least 2 of the 3 enemy archers, and he has to dodge the boss. The mages, however, are not very much of a threat to him, because we had him use the pure water earlier to boost his magic stat, and now it's kind of worn down a little bit, but the reason why we did that is because enemies in this game will not attack units if they can't deal any damage, and some of the enemy mages, particularly the ones with fire, are not going to attack Asvel if he's too magically resistant. So that's why we had his pure water wear off a little bit.
It's unfortunate that we have to have such an unreliable enemy phase, and we also have to blow like half of Asvel's craft caliber during this enemy phase. But it's kind of what we have to do, because if he were to use fire or thunder, he would also have to crit a lot of enemies, and that would make everything even more unreliable. Thankfully, he is being supported by Leaf, so that's 10% extra avoid, and Nana is also standing there with her charm skill. That's another 10% avoid, so that makes everything a little better. But it's still kind of annoying.
Yeah, another bonus that Asvel is getting is from Abel's leadership stars. You might have noticed that Abel's not doing anything right now. That's because she went off and got stoned. It really does kill a lot of relationships and stuff. But at any rate, Abel got hit by the stone staff. We cannot recover her because we don't have the Kia staff. And on top of that, she's being blocked by a couple of tiles, so we can't reach her regardless. So Abel is basically gone until towards the end of the game. Right there, first of all, we had Lara equip a scroll because that Thunder Mage could potentially crit her, and we don't want her to get crit. And on top of that, she got captured by the other mage. Just a quick note about capture mechanics in this game. Normally stuff gets stolen, but scrolls don't get stolen at all when units are captured, so we don't need to worry about her losing that scroll.
Yeah, Lara essentially diverted two enemies and made this enemy phase a bit safer, because the two mages that attacked her, or that were diverted by her, have Thunder Tomes, and they are a bit more powerful than Fire Tomes, so they're a bit more likely to kind of cut through Asvel's magic boost. They are a little less accurate, but regardless, we do want to keep at least one of them alive, just because we want to steal one of them in the upcoming player phase. Asvel can't be using Graph Caliber forever, and it'll be a while before we can buy tomes that we really want. So in order to tide him over in the meantime, we're going to have him be using the Fire Tome that we stole in the previous chapter, and also a Thunder Tome that we're going to be stealing right now. Incidentally, stealing the Thunder Tome, again, one-hit KOs the enemy mage, so Lifis is really kind of showing what's up here.
Lifis stealing things also is causing that bishop to move in that weird way. And in this game, when enemies have their inventory emptied or they can no longer use any weapons, they just try to flee the map because they are defenseless. So that's why the bishop is moving that way. In a few turns, we'll actually be blocking his way, and then it will try to escape the other way, and it just looks kind of silly.
Yeah, sadly that bishop is blocking the path to a random chest that's kind of pointless. I believe all it has is a magic ring. But I think you guys can guess that it would cost us turns to get that magic ring, as useful as it would be, so we're not going to go after it. I really have no idea why it's there.
The chest placement in this chapter is really kind of bizarre. In addition to the magic ring, there's also two chests near the end of the map. You'll see them later on the left side that are being guarded by two weird-looking dark mages, and I don't remember what those chests contain because I've never bothered getting them before. Not only are they a detour to get, but the Dark Mages are just a real pain in the butt, and we don't want to deal with them at all. We'll kind of show you why later in the chapter. So I don't understand the placement of those treasures.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. I like this lone mage that materialized earlier. Like a while before, this chapter's exit was blocked by a wall. But once a couple of events happened that we were actually allowed to exit, that wall turned into that mage, and that mage is probably very confused as to why he came into existence, but Asvel is going to put him out of his misery and get into another precarious enemy phase.
This enemy phase is just a bunch of soldiers, and it has the bishop with the Meteor, and also has an armor knight. Naturally, we're going to send Lara out there to get captured by one of them so we can take care of them later. But one interesting thing here is that enemies have movement variation in this game. So on top of all this already weird movement growth that many units have, there's movement variations among enemies, which sort of messes up a lot of strategies sometimes. So for instance, I believe one of these soldiers has an extra point of movement, so Asvel is actually going to be taking an extra hit that could potentially just mess things up.
It ends up working out for us because it's some extra damage, although it also wastes the Graph Caliber Tome use because normally he wouldn't use it. But the soldier that Raven was talking about is the one over in the bottom left corner of that formation. Soldiers in this game normally have 5 movement, this guy is 6 movement, and so he can attack Asvel. Now, Asvel's chance of death on this enemy phase is really not that bad. It's not nearly as bad as the previous enemy phase, and it's not nearly as bad as everything going right with Abel in the arena. These soldiers, unlike the previous soldiers, all have javelins, so they have a bit less hit. They only have around 20 hit on Asvel, and again he has the double support boost from Leaf, who's currently captured, and Nana, who is 3 tiles behind him. And it was, my heart also kind of stopped when he got hit by the javelin soldier, because like I had already gotten past the worst part of this chapter, and I was like, please don't die, please don't get hit, please don't ruin this take that's been going so well thus far.
Thankfully, Meteor isn't that accurate, and Asvel lives to see another day. You can see just how tight the movement management is for this chapter. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and it's basically determined by how quickly our 5-move units, Brighton and Dalshin, get to the exit. Some units have more freedom than them, but Dalshin and Brighton basically have to walk in the straight line to the exit as far as this chapter has straight lines. But for example, someone like Lara or Leafis, they can move around almost completely freely because they have 7 move. So they have some flexibility there, and then Leaf is kind of in the middle. And for example, like Brighton, he can't really be rescued by anyone because if Dalshin picks him up, then he loses movement since Brighton is so fat. And Fergus also can't really do anything like that, so it's really tricky.
There's a lot of irony behind the fact that all of our mounted units are holding us back, because they're the ones with 5 move this time around. So it's almost like this game is the foot unit's way of trying to get appreciated for once. But at the same time, they're still doing rescue chains. Like right there, we just had Brighton rescue Fergus, who then Dalshin just took and dropped right next to him to give him that extra movement. It's one thing I really like about this game, though, that they just penalize mounted units indoors somehow. Because, like, in other firearm games, you can just buff up your mounted unit and just have them steamroll through the game. In this game, even with growths, stats don't even matter that much. Obviously, they matter a little more in 0% growths because it's harder to steamroll things. But stats don't matter that much, and it's much harder for your units to steamroll things because it just requires you to think a lot more.
Well, speaking of stats mattering, something that we should talk about, particularly in this chapter, is at the very beginning you notice that we checked the stats on some of the arena enemies and also on one particular priest. And the reason why we did that is because stat fluctuation in this game is pretty intense. It's much larger than in pretty much any other game in the series. For example, if you were to play FE10 and you reloaded a chapter save every single time, units would only fluctuate maybe about 1 to 2 points in any of their stats, but in this game this fluctuation can be as large as 5 points, and the reason for this is how the stats are calculated. All enemy units in this game have a particular set of growth rates that apply either to like magical units or physical units, that's determined by the game. And then after the growth rates are implied, every single one of their stats gets an extra 0 to 3 point bonus, and that 0 to 3 point bonus is where most of the fluctuation comes from. And sometimes the fluctuation can prevent strategies from working because suddenly you aren't able to double something, or you aren't able to one-round KO something, or something is able to kill you a little faster than you thought would have otherwise.
So there's not many enemies left in this map, but the few that are there, a couple of them are really threatening. 2 of them are these dark mages in the 3x3 room that you see on the left. If you hug the wall next to them, then they will attack you, and they almost want to kill most of our units, and then they also poison us because dark magic poisons in this game when an enemy uses it on you, so we need to avoid that. And there's also this really big asshole sniper all the way down there. He has a silver bow and he's pre-promoted, so pretty high speed and stats overall. And one of the only units that we have, if not the only unit, is Machua. She's the only one that can really survive him because she has a nice combination of high speed and high enough HP. And then we also need a safe space to go to for the rest of our units in order to get to escape in time. So we actually need to kill the sniper, and that too is not easy at all.
Ordinarily, our way of dealing with tougher enemies was to have them capture one of Lara or Leafis, and then we would end up killing them with the Fergus critical, or we would pummel them with a bunch of our other units. Sadly, bow users can't actually capture in this game just because they attack with 2 range. So we're going to skip step 1 of that and just combine the other 2, and we attack him with Leaf. Then we hope that Fergus gets a critical because he's so good at doing that. And instead of getting a critical and killing the guy, he breaks the rapier. So Asvel, determined to make up for his teammates' incompetence, decides to pick up the slack and put the team on his back and kill the sniper once and for all, thereby saving Don Don from the hell of potentially having to play this 21-minute chapter again when the end is so close.
So the remainder of this map, because we've eliminated now all the combat threats, it's just moving all of our units to the escape point. We have to shuffle a couple of our 5-move units, more specifically Karen and Nana, forward a little bit because they've kind of fallen behind. Dalshin, instead of heading towards the escape point, went away from the escape point and captured an enemy priest instead. This is not because Dalshin has a bad sense of direction or anything, This is totally intentional, and you can guess that we're not going to have him escape the map with the rest of Leaf's comrades. So, we're sorry, Dalshin, but you've done well. Your contributions will not be forgotten. The priest that he captured gives up a very important physics staff that we're going to be using to grind Safi's level to level 10 before she promotes in order to use the warp staff. So, if you were to think of it this way, you could say that like Dalshin is contributing to our warping shenanigans later in the map. So when Leaf finally escapes the map, he bids a tearful farewell to Asvel. He swears revenge on the villains who did this to her and promises to save her. In the process of doing so, he kind of forgets that Dalshin is also left behind, and he doesn't make any mention of that. But don't worry, he's in our thoughts. We'll grab him later on. So that's Chapter 5 completed in 15 turns. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Later.